Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a phenomenal guest. We've got Annie Wissner on. She is the head of marketing at Choozle. And we're going to talk about what we all deal with from time to time. How do we start as a new VP of marketing, a new head of marketing, anybody who's in charge of marketing an organization? Because when you come in, there's always a litany, a laundry list of things that you're being asked to do. But what we have to do is we have to be able to understand and set vision for the organization in order to chart out a road to success, a path to success. We're going to talk about that today as a subject matter. And in terms of your background, Annie, you've been in the business for a while, long enough to work with a number of startups, Microsoft. You've had the opportunity to come in, assess, and put the company, put the startup on the road to success. So maybe before we start talking about that, if you wouldn't mind just expanding a little bit on your background for us and what you're doing now at Choozle.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, I do have a pretty lengthy technology background. I've also been head of marketing for a digital agency, and I've done everything from Microsoft's largest event to building partner programs from the ground up to establishing demand generation engines at mid-sized businesses. I've really had a wealth of experience and exposure to pretty much every aspect of marketing over the years.
I'm going to steal your thunder just a little bit in terms of, you made an analogy when we first got together. You said coming in is like fixing the plane in mid-flight. We've all been there, right? You felt that. So I think that really resonates with us. But when I asked you, how do you start? What's one of the very first things that you did or you do on a regular basis? And that is you talked about the importance of relationship building. Maybe you could start there and expand on that.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit embarrassed because this isn't something I figured out necessarily on my own. During one head of marketing starts, I had some people scheduling my calendar out, and one of the requirements was that I met with 30 people in the first 30 days. I had never done anything like that before, and I thought, my goodness, this is a lot of meetings. But that exercise really proved to me the importance of meeting with a broad swath of the people within the organization to very quickly onboard, get the history, understand who's who, understand who you can go to for different questions and different projects. And I've since implemented that wherever I go, and it's been extremely helpful.
It should be a fundamental. When you think back in retrospect, I do a lot of podcasts on why somebody's the head of marketing, like why B2B CMOs fail so quickly. One of the major reasons is the relationships they have with their peers in the C-suite, but with others. Because you can't come into meetings and feel like, we're going to get everything accomplished on the agenda. It's what happens before the meeting, the relationships that are established, the agreements that are established, so that when you come into the meeting, you've got that background. You've got that vision, but you've got that connection established. So I think that's brilliant just to think, and I like the term 30 meetings in 30 days. Whether there's that many people in your organization that you need to meet with or not, but it just sets you on the right track that I need to go on a tour. I need to be talking to these people. So with that kind of listening tour that you're talking about there, what is it you're trying to accomplish?
Usually you're reporting to the CEO as head of marketing. So the CEO really wants you to have a grasp for all of the in-flight, to use your flight reference again, motions within the business. It's really understanding all of the existing initiatives, what the objectives are, what's the go-to-market strategy for the business. Obviously, some of the history, who understands if it's a technical product, the history of the product, where it started, where it's going to today, et cetera. So I think that in your meetings with the CEO and with the board and with the rest of the executive leadership team, if you can talk about the initiatives and understand them so that you can begin providing that strategic input, it's going to definitely establish your credibility very quickly within the organization.
Now, I could only imagine that as a result of doing all of that, there's three things going to happen. You're going to find there's a lot of synergy and similarities in what you're hearing. You're going to find that there's big gaps in what you're hearing and understanding, or very divergent perspectives from the board to the CEO to the head of departments on direction and vision in the company, because sometimes that's not very clearly defined. So when you're doing this tour, I only can imagine that you're also identifying Where are those gaps? Where do we need to bring people together? Where do we need to have a unified vision of what we're doing, what we're going? So is that a big part of what comes out of this listening tour in terms of planning next steps and moving forward?
Absolutely. I think that it's twofold. On the one hand, you're looking for obviously to assess the marketing function within the business, but also you're looking at all of the other associated departments that impact marketing. For example, if there are product issues or delays on the product side, that can be a huge impact to marketing. If there are customer service or customer success or churn issues, then you need to incorporate churn mitigation into your strategy right off the bat, et cetera. It's not just what's happening with marketing, it's what's happening with the business, especially as you move up to the executive level and you're a part of that strategy team. It's really important to have that broad scope.
Once you've done all of this, I guess it would be the very beginning of what you might call an assessment phase, but that's not the only part of an assessment phase. What do you do after this listening tour? What's the next step?
So I think the next step is to make sure that you're doing the listening tour. You want to make sure that you really analyze everything from brand perception to market positioning, reviewing the competitive landscape. You have to very importantly identify what's working, where we're generating interest and demand, and what's not working, where we're bleeding resources and seeing zero return. And then the other piece that I think a lot of people miss is job descriptions. I do a very deep analysis with each person in the marketing function to really get a clear understanding of their current job and also what they were hired for originally, what they're doing now, what they do best and what they enjoy doing, et cetera. So once you have all of that sort of encapsulated, then you can really start building a plan and a strategy to move forward.
So important because lots of times you find that the people that were hired to do something are completely doing something different and they're not. So assessing that within the team is super important. How do you go about understanding this is a new role? You've done a lot of the internal listening tours and everything, but understanding the competitive landscape, the
Yes.
challenges that your clients are facing or that you're facing as an organization. How do you go about that?
I think that it's the listening tour can't just be internal, it's also got to be external, right? Of course. So there's a number of things you need to do. One thing I always do during the listening tour, I didn't mention this before, is that I listen in on sales calls. If your organization has a tool like Gong where these calls are recorded, you can go back and listen to them, which is extremely helpful. But I try to participate in as many customer facing, if it could be a physical in person meeting or just a phone call or virtual meeting, I'll participate in those. And then on the competitive side, a lot of times you can find clients that were previously with a competitor and interview them. And then we're fortunate today to have a lot of very sophisticated tools like SEMrush that can give you a lot of insight into at least the digital side of your competitors, how much they're investing in advertising, how their website is performing, what share of the digital market do they have. And since the digital world is so important in marketing, you can really get a lot of information from that.
A really good point. So you've done all of this. This is all prep, but you've also been handed a number of things that are like in midstream, that mid-flight, things that are urgent. Thank goodness you're here. We haven't been able to start this. The list, the pile of requests is this high as you're out doing this listening tour and you're making the assessments and everything. How do you balance that? What's the trick? Because you could spend the entire time, years, you could spend in marketing tactics. So what's your recommendation on how do you actually balance that?
It's an excellent point because you can get into a position where you get really tactic focused, especially if you're listening to input from your peers and from the executive team and even the board. You can just get caught into this tactic trap. So it's really important as an executive marketing leader to make sure that you're using your skills to be strategic. A big part of that is a bit tactical, and that's simply making sure you have a tool like ClickUp or Asana. I actually use those tools personally to plan my time. And I make sure that I'm dividing my time across tactical execution, midterm strategy, and then big strategic wins. And a big part of that is I use an agile process to marketing execution where I chunk the tasks out and make sure that I'm delivering across those three kind of primary pillars.
And one of the things that I always found was really good is two things. One, learn how to say the word no, or couple that with tell me if it's coming in from sales or something like that. Tell me what the priority is. We've got this set of activities we're already doing. Help me establish the priorities. And even saying that takes a lot of requests because it's easy to ask and it's hard to deliver. We have to have some ways that we have others help and collaborate in setting those priorities. How do you show that you can get some quick wins? What's the importance of doing that?
It's tremendously important. And it's about people are going to determine how good you are within the first 90 days. It's just within the first 30 days. It's just how people operate, especially with a big hire head of marketing. They're going to be expecting a lot. And obviously, in some cases, there were 250 candidates or 1,000 candidates, and you won this position. And they're going to be looking for evidence that they made the right decision. So you really do have to get some quick wins very fast. And I think that one of the things that you have to do is understand through the listening tour is just distill from that what the top priorities are to the board, to the CEO, to the leadership team, and then just gain alignment on those and then follow through and deliver on them. It can be something as simple as maybe the company hasn't had any broad air cover. So getting a very strategic announcement out in the marketplace that gets picked up by a lot of industry trade magazines and gets you some earned media, or it can be more on the demand generation side. It can be delivering a campaign that was stalled or maybe not effective, just optimizing it for people. One time, for example, I was head of marketing and they had just implemented an account-based marketing program and it wasn't generating anything. And I looked at it and each sequence was like 3 steps. So I just extended those to 14. I integrated LinkedIn and other tactics into it. And immediately we saw some wins. So it really depends. It's part of that assessment is identifying where you can get those wins.
And you know what we just said there? Sometimes the most basic things can fix. I'm working with an organization right now. They're like, the newsletter campaign's not working. We're getting good opens and clicks, but nobody's viewing. Went in and you're like, you're not landing on the right page. I mean, it's just something sometimes as simple as that. The next step that you talked about in some of our previous conversations was that you need to start to establish a publishing cadence. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I discovered, and this seems almost too simple to mention, but at the same time, I think it's a mindset shift that really helps, especially in a world where there's a lot of asks and people have a lot of demands for content and campaigns and other materials. And that is establishing a library approach for your content. And the first step of that is an assessment phase. It's documenting everything that you have and categorizing it across what you need. And what you need would basically be based upon your personas, your buyer's journey, the products that you have, the industries that you serve, the pain points that your clients have, and just creating a matrix of that. And then documenting what you have and determining what needs to be refreshed, what should just be deleted, and then where you have gaps so that whatever piece or campaign or material that you're creating is the most important thing that's going to generate the most return for your effort.
You mentioned something in there, which was this important, content's important. And I'm going to ask you a question and I'm going to have you put a rating on it. And then we're going to talk about why. And so a scale of 1 to 10. So if you could rate the importance of content to the overall growth and sustainability of your company, 1, it's not important at all. 10, it's actually vital to the overall growth and sustainability of the company. How would you rate that and why?
10, because so much of the sales process is online now. So basically, your content is your digital selling, and it's got to be extremely compelling and it's got to be enjoyable to consume.
And Gartner's come out, to your point, with their stats on the self-buying trend that B2B buyers, they're waiting to want to talk to us as organizations until it's longer and longer into their decision-making process, where they're already down to the short list. So what they're doing is they're spending more time of the same amount of time that they have. We all have the same 24 hours a day, but they're spending more time consuming content before they ever want to talk to us. So I think that focus on content at 10 out of 10 is incredibly important. Now, not all content is created. And in general, I think it was Forbes magazine called most B2B content crap. As organizations, we tend to favor content that is at the very end of the journey. The product marketing context is what we know the most. We can talk about our babies till the cows come home. But it's that content that's earlier in the journey that's more difficult to create. Thought leadership content. And Forbes, I think in another article, they talked about how they put it, content marketing solves problems. Thought leadership sparks conversations. And if that's our goal, as the buyer is waiting longer and longer to talk to us, our goal is to get that conversation started earlier in the process. And that puts a heavy burden on marketing, right? That makes us a more important part of the sales process if they're waiting longer and longer. And it's that content that's going to prove us as a trusted advisor, as an expert, as somebody they don't want to be sold to, they want to be advised. It's our burden to put that together. How do you think about the different levels of content that need to be created inside of that cadence?
I think that it's harder than it used to be because there used to be a much more sequential buyer's journey. Now, I think we've all seen that it's different for everybody. So you never know what type of content is going to trigger someone's interest. So I look at it as really understanding each persona and each buyer that I'm selling to, and then doing as much research as I can on how we're selling to that particular individual and then grouping that together. So at least I can get some idea of top of funnel, what works best for top of funnel for that type of person, mid funnel, and then close. I think that some of the core principles still hold fairly true, that closer to purchase, people are going to want case studies, they're going to want midstream, they're going to want competitive comparisons. At the top of the funnel, they're going to want really light, not product focused, not feature focused, but solution oriented for their particular positions. So things that help them do their job better are going to be preferable, whether they work with your brand or not. Can I get some value out of this? So brand agnostic, really, or product agnostic content would be top of the funnel. Mid funnel is going to be a little bit deeper, helping them compare your solution to another one, making it very clear how your product is different and better than other products and what their world looks like after using your product or service. And then towards the end, it becomes giving them materials to sell to their buying committee. Buying committees have grown. It's very rare that you have one or two or three people making that decision. Give them a deck to present to their team to justify the purchase, or even email templates and things, as well as case studies, but really helping them really become an extended part of your sales team, I think works very well at the bottom of the funnel.
Absolutely. That buying committee, so important. We tend to think about our ICP. We tend to think we put together a profile, a persona as an individual, but they're really the linchpin to the greater concerns and challenges and questions that are happening all across that buying committee. And there's a reason why buyers are asking these days for shorter form content. They're asking for more visual content. They're asking for more interactive content. It's easier for them to digest and it's easier for them to share. And if we don't think about that, we often think about how is our content going to be consumed by our internal audience in sales? Because if it's not packaged and supplied correctly to sales, then they're not going to know what it is. They're not going to use it. And then what good was it? The same thing. We have to think about packaging for the end user of our ICP and what they have to do to get those approvals. I'm really glad you brought in the notion of the buying committee there. What are some of the things in this first 90 days or first 6 months? What are some of the topics or the important points you want to make here that we haven't covered yet in the questions that I've been asking?
Okay. I think the first thing would be to really set your team up for success, assess the team, assess their skills, make sure that they have clear job descriptions. Every single time I come into a team, people's job descriptions are no longer accurate. People aren't really clear on what they're supposed to do, what the expectations are. I always make that really clear and make sure that everybody understands what their role is in the organization, how they're going to be measured, and how it fits within the team. A lot of times there's conflict or friction on the team because things aren't clear and people are overlapping or they're not sure who's doing what. So I really smooth all of that out because first and foremost, the team has to operate successfully. And then you can also determine if you have the right head count too many people, not enough people, gaps, etc. If you want to have everything in-house, if you want to outsource a portion of it, what your particular focus area is going to be based upon your team. Because depending on your team, you're going to lean more in maybe to demand generation, or maybe you're going to lean more into brand, just depending on the skills and the way that the headcount is currently set up. I don't like to do reorgs for reorg's sake. And I don't necessarily need to put my personal stamp on everything. If something's working great, I'm not going to change that. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to focus on the areas that are broken. And I think also it's making sure that you have a really clear, documented strategy and plan in place that's visible to everyone, that you're keeping updated, and that you have a very clear set of metrics that you're measuring and reporting on that align with the way that the CEO, executive team, and board thinks.
Boards, executives tend to be very metrics driven because taking in so much information, how do I know? What are the metrics that like are the barometer, the dashboard that tell you things are going okay? I don't have to worry about that. What are some of the most important metrics that you're reporting on to your CEO and to your board?
People don't like to talk about leads, but you still do want to look at lead volume, cost per lead. It's still important. You also want to move it all the way down the funnel, the sales funnel, to how many marketing leads are turning into sales qualified opportunities. And everybody has their own language for this. So if I'm not using the exact language you're used to, you could switch out the vocabulary and it's still the same thing. And then also, what portion of marketing qualified sales opportunities are converting into revenue? Because ultimately marketing is part of the revenue engine of the business. So you need to be able to track that all the way down. In some cases, I've entered environments where that hasn't been tracked before. They've had other metrics that are more vanity metrics. And I think impressions and vanity metrics are still important. They're signals to the more important metrics and how those will perform. But I always make sure that I'm focused on those, the leads, the pipeline, and then the revenue piece.
Makes sense. We're all trained. We have to be revenue focused, and we're part of that revenue team. It's the modern CRO is not really the chief sales officer. It's whoever's in charge of revenue is in charge of marketing, in charge of sales, in charge of customer success. Because expansion of our customers should be a significant portion of new revenue generation every year. We've talked about a lot here. Right? You've given us a lot of really good ideas, insights into how do you onboard? How do you give the company, but yourself, an opportunity to succeed and for the long term by starting out right? What's the one thing that you want everyone that's going to be viewing this or listening to this to take away? If there was one thing to take away, what would it be?
I'd say that if you're not extremely inspired by the marketing program, content, materials that you're writing or designing, don't do it, because other people are not paid to engage with your brand. So you have to make sure that whatever you're putting out there is outstanding, extremely relevant, and enjoyable to consume.
Makes so much sense because in this cadence that every company knows they have to produce, it was Forrester that said content is the foundation for all B2B marketing sales. So we know it's important. We know we have to keep cranking it out, but sometimes the system, that cadence takes over. It's like, I have a spot to fill. I have to keep feeding the beast, that content beast. So all of a sudden that becomes more important than the actual quality and the passion that's gone into it. It's more important. We can't lose that focus. That's a really good point. I love that you have to have a passion for it. It has to hit you, because if it's not, it's not going to really do a lot. I'm just feeding the beast.
A good limit test is, does it give you energy or not?
Very good point. So Annie, if there were other folks that had additional questions for you, wanted to get in touch with you, would it be appropriate to put out with the episode a link to your profile on LinkedIn?
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah, I'm always willing to connect with people, and I'm always looking to make new connections, grab coffee, have lunch. I'm in the Denver area, so if people are local, would love to even have a face-to-face. So yeah, I'm very open to connecting both in Denver and beyond.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of your insights. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure as well. I really enjoyed speaking with you today, Steve.